Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a time capsule episode of the Say Report. I'm your host, Devon Decker, and joining me, my host companion, Sejohn Sarowick. Sejohn?
Are we going to really do a bit where we're trying to be really solemn about this particular film?
Well, the fact of the matter is that over the next hour and however many minutes, I'd like to prove the thesis who is dumb and who is dumber. So I wanted to approach it in a sort of academic setting, mostly so I could end this episode with thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Because this is the audition, right? You
Can I
do.
end your TED Talk right now?
Yeah, of course. It's just
The
one of
friggin'
those.
poster, the friggin' poster says Jim Carrey, dumb. Jeff Daniels, dumber. It says it on the goddamn tin, man.
I did not know that. Does it really say it on the tin which one is dumb and which one
So
is dumber?
it doesn't say as, but their names are right above like those two. Like they are listed just above those and then placed on the poster in every iteration with Jim Carrey on the left and I was going to say Jerry Ryan. Sorry, getting
That'd be
regular 2000
great.
off from my head. Jeff Daniels as dumber.
How
I
okay, but
like
how many times have you
I
seen a movie poster where the names are reversed from how the people are below it?
For
There
me
is
that's telling
stipulation.
that for me that is telling. You're not wrong that there is definitely history of that happening, but it's telling to me that that means that nobody was talking to the marketing team, and that means that like nobody cared enough to talk to the marketing team because it wasn't a movie that they felt they needed to get behind to do that sort of thing. This is not that kind of movie.
People were too busy on Dumb and Dumber trying to get Jeff Daniels not to be in it. Let's just talk. I don't know what to do here. So yeah, so this is a time capsule episode of the Stay Report. We do these every once in a while, so that we have something in the bank. And if you've been following along with our time capsule episodes, then you know that this is the end of a trilogy.
Yeah. Yeah, we've been working our way through the year of 1994 and following one Jim Carrey from Ace Ventura into The Mask and finally into this. And I'm super happy we get to talk about this one. You know what I mean? Can I say that outright? Like out of the three of them, surprisingly, for the R-rated like toilet humor one, out of the three of them, I find it to be the least offensive nowadays. And I don't mean that in terms of like it's not offensive. Like there's definitely some great like troubling humor in this movie, but it is not nearly on the level of, say, the last 20 minutes of Ace Ventura, as we've talked about in the past, right? Also, on top of that, I think it holds up the best out of the three of them. The jokes still work for me I think, at every moment. I don't think there's a moment where I feel like a joke is aged out.
Good. That's good because conflict breeds interest. And I don't necessarily disagree with the fact that it is the one that's aged the best, but I don't love this film the way I think I did when I was a child. And that's strange to me. I am excited to be talking about it though for two reasons. One, our very first time capsule episode was on Shallow Hal, so it's nice to revisit the Farrelly Brothers,
Yeah.
as it were. Actually, that's not true. Our very first time capsule episode, I believe, was on Alex Incorporated, but that ended up dropping like early because Alex Incorporated got wicked canceled wicked fast.
Yeah, yeah.
So it aged itself out and we had to drop it, but it didn't feel like a time capsule. So it was interesting to go back to the Farrelly Brothers, specifically to their very first film, and that's something that makes me excited about Dumb and Dumber. But I think it leans into exactly what you just said. The fact that we've examined now three Jim Carrey films, all from the year 1994, and this one feels the least like the other two.
Yeah. I think that that's what helps it, to be entirely honest. But yeah, go ahead.
No, I mean that's what I'm saying is that like this movie has the longevity because it is not it's not the Jim Carrey show, but I also feel kind of weird saying that. There's a lot to unpack here. And before we get started, I'd like to share a little anecdote about Dumb and Dumber, if
Okay.
you'll indulge me.
Yeah.
And it goes back 10 years to when I was working on The Carnival Dream And I worked in the comedy club, and I was a young man, right? I was not yet 25. I was a 24-year-old on the sea, and I was meeting, females. And even though it is very much against the rules when you're an employee of a cruise ship to fraternize with the guests, I was in a forward-facing position running the comedy club, so I did that. I interacted a lot with passengers, and one week, I want to say it was about a month into that, very attractive girl who, I don't really ascribe to the league thing, but definitely out of my league. And most of this cruise, she was being pursued by kind of the all-American dude. Like, if this were a TV show and everything followed the stereotypes of what we believe the Hollywood leading man is and the Hollywood leading lady, these two would have gotten together. It would have been like match made in heaven, and they would have gone out and had a whole privilege of Karens together. And that would have been a lot of fun for them, I imagine. But this guy had a tragic flaw. And that tragic flaw is all he did was quote Dumb and Dumber.
Okay, that's not really on the movie though, right? Like, we all knew that kid, like, in school growing up, that just, like, this was the movie that maybe they got to see when they shouldn't have, and they just lost their shit about it, right?
Right, exactly. That's like, I'm not trying to say, it's not trying to cast anything on the movie, but like, that's 16 years, 16 years after the fact, right? That's 16 years after Dumb and Dumber comes out, and that guy just never got away from being that kid. So that story exemplifies something for me as a human being, because on the one hand, it represents what a cultural touchstone Dumb and Dumber is, but the fact that that did not work in any way, shape, or form, it sort of represents the duality of this film and its place in culture.
Well, so I think the best way for me to really kind of describe what you're talking about, because I get that feeling, I understand where you're coming from, and for me, it's this. The Farrelly Brothers clearly, in making this movie, set out to make a Three Stooges film, and we can talk more about that later, because they do eventually make a Three Stooges film that falls completely flat for a lot of people, and we'll touch on that in a second. But they clearly set out to make that style, right? Like the idea of these idiots in these situations over their heads, they don't understand that they're over their heads, and all that great comedy that ensues from this, right? And I think that what you're talking about is feeling about this movie in the ways that a lot of people feel like going back to Three Stooges stuff, right? Like, it is the common trope for people to talk about how, like, the patriarch of the family loves Three Stooges and nobody else does, but they put up with it because that's his thing, right? Like, and it was that for a little bit in my house as well. Like, my dad very much grew up on, like, Stooges and Little Rascals and all this other silly shit with the slapstick comedy stuff from that time, and like, we would watch it on Sunday mornings because it was on AMC on a loop, and it was fun. It was like watching, it was like cartoons and cereal for me, right? And like, and this movie, I think, in a true testament to itself, has aged right now, right? Like, it has become that thing where, like, there is somebody in your life that you know that loves this movie, and this movie is harmless enough that you kind of just, like, you accept that that's part of that person's personality, right? But, like, it doesn't jive with everybody, and I can totally definitely see that. Like, the comedy. The thing for me about this, and maybe it is in this, like, this vacuum of Jim Carrey's career of 1994 that we've been doing it, is that key word is harmless. Yeah. There's so much harmless comedy in this movie that it still works for me because it's kind of refreshing, to be entirely honest.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there is a big part of me that wonders how dumb they actually are, and what. So the word dumb, right? It doesn't. There's a definition associated with dumb, and if I were better, I'd have that definition ready to go. Like, the Oxford English Dictionary defines dumb as, but I don't have that. I don't have that going. But it's a subjective term. So to call them dumb, like, doesn't mean they're ignorant. Like, is it dumb to not understand the difference between Austria and Australia, or is it just ignorant? Like, I don't know. But then there's this thing where, like, there's two kinds of dumb, and there's the kind of dumb where you're just a dumb person and that's it. Like you got, but you have like a good heart. Or there's a dumb, you're dumb, but like that's an excuse for your actions. And I feel like these guys really fall into that latter category for me. Like the stuff they do, as much as it's harmless, and I understand why you say harmless comedy, right? I don't think it could offend on a broader scale.
Yeah.
But that being said, they hurt a lot of people.
Individuals, yes. They hurt individual people. When I say harmless comedy, I mean that they are constantly punching left, right, and up. They're never really ever punching down. The closest I think they get is the blind kid joke, and even then, it's such a one-off joke for me, and like it's
Roger Ebert laughed out loud in the theater when he saw that.
Yeah, I mean, like it's such a great bad joke, you know what I mean? And I think that's what it is this movie revels in the fact that it knows that its humor is shitty. And I think that's where we have to start talking about the Farrelly Brothers, right? Is they know that their humor is quintessential toilet humor. I mean, to the point where there is a 10-minute toilet joke in this movie, right? Like they know where they're coming from, and that is where, and that knowledge, that acceptance, that understanding of like, we know exactly what we're gonna do, and then they fucking commit to it, is what makes this movie work. And I think it's what you see in later films not work for them, is they just never strike the same goal that they do with Dumb and Dumber, of having an entire cast. And I don't mean just their two leads, I mean every side character, every extra in the scene, like everybody just seems to fucking get the joke in this movie in a way that just doesn't happen in later films. The closest they ever get again is Something About Mary, and even then there's some uncomfortableness in a couple of those scenes as well, right? Like but like take a look at Three Stooges here, like all the way out, which is basically like they're finally their chance. It's like the movie they wanted to make when they made Dumb and Dumber, and then they finally get the chance to make it, and we're so far removed from this, and it's so, and the comedy is so questionable in it, that like you can tell that people in the scenes are not comfortable with what they're doing and saying. There's always this sense of just like everybody's just on the edge of breaking and stopping and being like, is this really what we're doing? Like you just expect Sean Hayes at some point to just yell cut himself and be like, can we rethink this?
Okay, it's not related to Dumb and Dumber. I mean, it is tangentially, but who plays Mo? I know Sean Hayes is Larry. I know Will Sasso is Curly. I can't for the life of me remember who plays Mo in that movie.
No, I got IMDb,
and it's bumming me out.
Well, it's because it's another like Mad TV like alumni there that we don't really give enough credit to. Probably. Hold on, you give me 2 seconds.
Yeah, no worries at all. While you're looking that up, because it's that. But also, if we want to talk about them being like we are toilet humor and trying to return to that, you have something like Movie 43,
right?
Which is like. Movie 43 is sort of the antithesis to Dumb and Dumber in a lot of ways, because Dumb and Dumber, you talk about everybody being in on the joke. It almost feels like they exclusively cast character actors for this film. Mm-hmm. Like, nobody is a real actor in this movie, except for kind of, and I'm not trying to cast aspersions or anything like that with that action, except for Jeff Daniels. Because, and that's why they're sort of like waving him off from doing this movie. It's why the producers are saying, we can't have Jeff Daniels doing this because he's not a comedy actor. Like, if you don't have a comedian in that other role, it's going to fail. And you have his manager saying, if you do this, you're never going to live it down. You're never going to work again if you do Dumb and Dumber.
Okay. To answer your question about the Mo thing really quick, because this is actually kind of cool. He's actually not normally a TV actor. He's normally a voice actor. Sorry. And his name is Chris. You did this to me on purpose. I know you did. Diamantopoulos, I think.
Chris Diamantopoulos. Yeah. Okay.
Diamantopoulos. And just what goes around comes around. He's the one currently playing Aquaman in the Harley Quinn TV series on DC, and he's friggin' hilarious there. So like, the dude's got some chops. He's in DuckTales, plays Storkules in DuckTales and stuff like that. Like he's very well known to you by his voice.
Yes, that's it. I just couldn't remember who Mo was, because like I always think, like, especially with Will and Grace just coming to an end to actually ground this time capsule episode. Like I always thought it was a little strange that Sean Hayes was like Larry. because you don't think of him as that character.
Well, and and I think what it is like, let's talk about Jeff Daniels and Dumb and Dumber, right? Is the Farrelly Brothers have these? I mean, movie 43 is infamous for this as well, but in really kind of shitty ways. The ways in which they used contracts to force people to be in that movie. But like the Farrelly Brothers want these kinds of people in their film. They want these guys with this pedigree in comedy, and so like they will go out of their way to try and find an actor that they know that they first of all A, want to work with, and then B, that they know they can get to that point, right? And the problem is that that actor has to come with you, right? And so you look at something like Jeff Daniels in Dumb and Dumber, and he is with them every step of the way in this movie.
Yes, and I mean, it's just gross. We're talking about backstage stuff before we get to the movie. He got paid $50,000 for this movie. On the other hand, Jim Carrey got paid $7 million to be in this film. And initially it was just going to be $700,000 to be in Dumb and Dumber, but then Ace Ventura opens at number 1 and they're able to negotiate, that up a whole lot of money.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons, infamously, that they only offered Jeff Daniels such a small fee to be in this film was because they thought that he would turn it down. And that's this thing about this movie that, like, I wasn't prepared for when I started digging into it a little bit deeper. Because, like, I watched the film, and for me, as much as this is the third Jim Carrey movie of 1994, as much as Jim Carrey is exactly what we're going to be looking at today, and I know that we've done a lot of like background on the film before we get into it, but A, it's because this does sort of feel like a two-hander in a lot of ways, but also we're from Rhode Island, so the Farrelly Brothers is like, that's what you take in 8th grade history course, is the Farrelly Brothers.
Well, I do want to say that, like, whatever your feelings are going to be at the end of this episode, man, like, we both clearly want to give this movie its due in a way that we didn't feel was necessary for Ace Ventura or The Mask. Like take heed of that.
I was right there. But when you look at like this movie, I remember Jeff Daniels in this movie. And I remember Jeff Daniels in this movie for a couple of reasons. A, to go back to the thesis that we have definitely abandoned because apparently it's right on the tin, and I just choose to ignore that. I don't think of Jeff Daniels as dumber, and that all boils down to the fact that Lloyd Christmas doesn't recognize the word "the" when he's reading. It's not that he cannot read. It's because he has like difficulty with like international, like bigger words that maybe he's never seen before. But like you see the word "the" everywhere. The is the most.
Now. It's making me laugh now.
But like
because it's the rule of 3, right? He gets 2 big words wrong, and then he gets caught up on this one, and at that point I couldn't figure out what word he was trying to say, and then Jeff Daniels reveals it's just the word "the," and I just lost it.
I mean, I go back to phonics, like learning phonics in 1st grade, and being told like the word "the" it don't follow any of these rules. Like I know that we've been like TH is a sound, and don't try to use the phonetically. Was basically what I was taught.
I got a theory in a second, but I want you to finish your thought. But
it's just one of those things where like Jeff Daniels is usually the person that I watch this film for, and for a lot of reasons, like especially you watch him go forward, you see him in the newsroom, and you see him in all these like real heavy acting roles, so it's nice to see him flexing his comedic chops. But for this viewing, I specifically was watching for Jim Carrey, and it changed how I view this movie.
Yeah, well, okay. So throw this on the table. I don't think Lloyd Christmas is a good person.
Right.
Yeah.
You're not wrong.
So with that on the table, though, my question is, do you think these guys are real people? We have talked about how Ace Ventura, by the end of that movie, you're like, oh, he's just basically a god. So like the rest of the world does not work with him as a character. And it's part of the reason why we kind of fell flat on that movie this time. And then with The Mask, the whole point is that he is this thing that is not of this world, right? And so like in a weird way, its acknowledgement of that makes that movie still kind of work. And it's why Jim Carrey is this like rubber man, like funny man in that role is so interesting still to watch, right? So in this one, I could not help but feel that this is the most grounded that that his character is in these films, but at the same time, these two people do not feel like real people, right? Like it's like watching like a Greek like satyr play, or like, you know what I mean, or even like a good dumb like Shakespearean moment where you have these two characters that are kind of, they don't seem to quite fit the rest of what's happening in the rest of the story, but at the same time, like they are so much more interesting than what's going on in the rest of the story. So that tells you a little bit about my feelings on Shakespeare. But like, and I think that the Farrelly Brothers lean into that in that there is this whole subplot of the kidnapping going on that we really don't know much about. Nor really do I feel like I care to know much more about, but the two of them are the focus instead. So they feel like they are not like real people, but rather like they are representative of what is dumb.
Like they're dumb incarnate. They're
Yeah,
the
yeah.
personification of dumb.
Yeah, yeah. That they are just basically just like idiocy like on the page. That's all that they are, which is what gives them permission to. Because I'll be honest, they're not consistent in a lot of their stuff. Because you talk about are they dumb or not, and I honestly can't answer that question. Because in one hand you see that shit with Lloyd not being able to read, but on the other hand, his entire fucking like manipulative nature and the plans that he has, where he like where he basically like runs schemes on people and things like that, are very obviously like genius. You know, like some of the stuff that they pull is pretty well thought out. Like the moment I'm thinking specifically about is in the diner when they trick the guys into paying for their food, or you know, or at least get dine and dash on that place, right? Like, and the way that they let that Lloyd leads Harry up to that group, convinces them that they're gonna buy them those beers. Then he goes up and it works perfectly to the waitress. It just points to the table, and the guys are like, "Yeah, us over here." And he's like, "Yeah, they're gonna cover our bill." And then they run out the door. Like that was genius. Like in its shittiness for sure, but it was genius.
Well, I mean, it's genius on the part of the filmmakers because it's the same thing happens with Jeff Daniels in Something Wild. That's the movie because he says, I learned it from watching a movie. But I have that in my notes where is being a fan of movies, does that make you dumb? Because, like, is that like a thing that they're trying to say?
I never thought that.
I,
No.
I never thought that either, but like a lot of where Lloyd's structuring of the world and the way that he approaches the world seems to come from cinema.
Mm.
I mean, you think about that, he
All of
gets
his
that
flashbacks.
plan. Yeah,
Yeah,
his
all of his
flashbacks,
dreams,
his
his
dream
daydreams and stuff.
sequences
Yeah.
are very movie driven, like that. Like it's not dumb to the thing that's dumb about that scene with Cam Neely Seabass is that he remembers the scheme, and then when Harry's like, and then they get away with it, and he's like, oh no, he catches up and he murders them like halfway down the road, is one of those things where like, so the dumb thing is to not consider the consequences
Right, right.
of this.
You learned the wrong lesson, which is a pretty dumb thing to learn the wrong lesson from the movie. It's like,
But it's a very interesting thing to have a film come out in 1994 where one of the focal points of it is when you watch a movie, maybe don't learn the wrong lesson, maybe
right.
understand.
Right. That's what makes it an intelligent joke, right? Like,
Right.
let's break down the structure of a joke here. That is exactly what I mean when I say this movie is always punching up, or, you know, is
Yes.
like the butt of that joke is actually like, you know, it was actually not about like dining and dashing on a poor waitress. It was not about like pissing everybody off in that diner. The butt of the joke is like, oh, this idiot wasn't really thinking this all the way through.
Yes. And there's also, I mean, like that the diner scene is kind of the best moment of comedy in it. Like him saying to the waitress, "What's the soup du jour?" and her response being, "Is the soup of the day." She should have told them what the soup is. Like if a customer asks you, "What's the soup du jour?" like for that waitress to think that this guy is legitimately asking me what that means.
And I'm
Speaks
just
to
thinking
her
of the Monkeys and
intelligence.
Beatles comment where he talks about the monkeys being a
A huge influence
for
on the Beatles. Yeah.
Right? Like it establishes them, it establishes their relationship really well in that line, because like Lloyd is just so matter-of-factly leading Harry on, and Harry's just like willing to go for it. But the thing that's also important to remember about that later on is that Harry also is not as like stupid as we think, as dumb as we think, because we learn that he's kind of always known that Lloyd is not a great person, but he still likes him. He's still his friend, right? Like, man, this movie still does it for me.
You know what I'd like to see, and maybe I'm just dreaming here. I don't know if this will ever happen. I'd like to see a movie where these two guys met. Like, if I could see when Harry met Lloyd, that's the movie that I bet would be fantastic.
You know, I want to go out on a limb here and say I probably don't need that in my life, Devin. I don't think that would be necessary for me because, again, I don't see these two as real people. So trying to establish any type of real backstory for them just would fall completely flat for me.
Yeah, what if they had that guy from NCIS in it, though?
Oh, okay.
Just
Never
like
mind.
spitballing.
I'm completely in. Never mind, you've got me.
No, but like there was this moment watching this film where I did question that exact thing where like, so I understand why Dumb and Dumberer happened, why it existed. I don't like that it's called Dumb and Dumberer and it's a flashback movie because the Dumb and Dumberer means that you're adding, not
there's
subtracting.
so many better, right? And there's so many better titles, like When Dumb Met Dumber. Like, come on, like that would have been like the subtitle was gonna be the better title, and then they fucked it all up.
Yeah, but like it, I speak to that in the fact that they are sort of this just representation of dumb and like the stupidity that's inherent in the world. So, but then there was still this thing where it's like how these two guys get together, because a big part of this film is also watching the deterioration of their friendship.
Well,
and
I feel like what happens in this movie with their friendship. You're not wrong. The arc of this film is, we haven't even talked about the fact that like the plot line of this movie yet, but
yeah.
But the arc of this film, the driving relationship in this film is the two of them, which is also super appreciated for a film in 1994. That it is really this bromance between the two of them before bromance was a thing, right? Like, and so the climax is when they have a quote unquote falling out or fight. But even that never really happens, A. And B, I feel like this is something that happens all the time with these two. They go through this ebb and flow of being pissy with each other and then coming back to each other, because they are good friends. They are kind of in a weird way like meant to be together, right? I mean, which is super evident by I think the roll credits of this movie. So I feel like as much as this movie is about the quote unquote deterioration of their friendship, I feel like they'll get back together and it's going to happen again, and they'll get back together again after that.
I guess so. That the only thing that I have that disproves that belief is the Freda Felcher line, because it feels like for the first time ever that Harry has realized that about Lloyd. And that,
I think Carrey has known that the whole time. You think that, and he's just been kind of sitting on it. You think that's a realization moment for him?
I feel like it's a realization moment for him, but I think it drives, like, I don't know. Can we talk about the plot of this film?
Let's talk about
because I think that this movie, it's not unbalanced, right? Because to look for balance in a film called Dumb and Dumber is to make you dumbest, right? Like.
Yeah. But it is a quintessential road trip comedy, right? Like and what's great about road trip comedies is that they allow you for basically like it's basically like a built-in sketch comedy, like
it's episodic,
talked about this.
Yeah.
We talked about this with National Lampoon's Vacation, the remake, when it came out, right? Is the idea that it gives you this ability to introduce characters and then completely throw them away in a moment's notice, which is great in sketch comedy because sometimes characters are good in small doses. And I think a perfect example of this is Harlan Williams as the cop in this one. I think his moment on screen is fabulous, and I don't need any more of him in this movie, right? Like, that move he makes is so like it's so Harlan Williams that physical like move he makes along with the noise is just perfect, and then I have no idea what it represents.
Well, he just drank piss. He drank piss, and that's his thing. And you're also gonna think Harlan Williams, first time in a movie drinking piss, and he's not the guy who drank piss in Dumb and Dumber. Which, I mean, maybe for some people he is, but he's not that for me. He's Rocket Man to me, and that movie is a movie, right?
See, I think of Rocket Man, and I think of Half Baked. Those are the two movies that I think of.
I also think of Down Periscope. I think that he is so good in Down Periscope with Lauren Holly again. Like,
yeah. So Dumb and Dumber. Harry and Lloyd are these two idiot friends living pretty much in squalor in Providence, Rhode Island. But I don't think that that is not something that bothers them. The fact that they are clearly very poor and very bad at keeping jobs and all this stuff that's not what's getting them down. Something though is definitely driving, and I think it's specifically Lloyd, right? Like I think like Lloyd is really kind of the impetus for a lot of this. And it's the reason why I think he is dumb and not dumber is because I think he's smart enough to recognize that he wants more. He just can't put his finger he can't put his finger on what that is, right? And so it's that idea that ignorance is bliss. Like Harry is perfectly happy. Jeff Daniels' Harry is perfectly happy where he is in life because he does not kind of realize that he probably should have more in his life than this, right? But Lloyd does. Like Lloyd always wants something more, and it's what leads to him being antagonistic towards Harry a lot of the time. Is because I think what he's coming up against is he's coming up against the fact that Harry won't move unless he does something to make him move. And for Lloyd, that is always something antagonistic and shitty, whether it's like sleeping with his girlfriend, selling off his shit, like convincing him to go on this road trip, like all of the stuff that Lloyd does to Harry is in an effort to help his friend be better. He just doesn't understand that what he's doing is not great, right? And so he pushes Harry out of the house after they both lose their jobs to go on this road trip to it's such a weird MacGuffin to deliver this briefcase to a woman who left it at the airport, right?
Yeah. Which
it's nonsense. It's like I said.
Not only is it nonsense, but it
is the definition of a MacGuffin. Like it is something that really means nothing to these two main characters. It's just something to move the plot along.
And it's so 1994. It's the most 1994 part of this film. Speaking of the fact of like the toxic masculinity and everything, like Lloyd, and we're calling him more conniving of the two, right? He believes,
right?
Yes. Well, yeah, no, I think that. I will concede that point right at the start, that he is the one who is coming up with plans and schemes, and Harry is just like a happy second, which is why if they were going to break this down, Jim Carrey is the lead and Jeff Daniels is the supporting actor. But he believes that if he returns this briefcase to this woman, that she will welcome him into her life as a lover. And that's a big issue when you think about people and like sex as a reward.
Yeah, I don't disagree, but I think the important thing that this film does over like Ace Ventura, where that proves to be true time and time again for Ace, we have learned that that's not going to be the case here, and in fact that is a huge plot point, is that Lloyd is misreading the conversation, right? So like that's the difference between the two. For like you have Ace, who does a lot of what he does, as we discussed, for like animal based needs. A lot of the time he doesn't accept money, he just takes sex for what he does in that movie, and that's like weird and upsetting, and it's the same concept here, except that it's not working for Lloyd. And I think that's the difference between the two is it's okay to make that joke and show that it doesn't work.
Right. But like we talked about with the Something Wild reference, sometimes people only take away half of the message.
Sure, but the movie outright calls you out for that, right?
But Sejohn, but I don't know. It's one of those things where like, if I return this briefcase, sex. And the respect to the Farrelly brothers is they write that off right from the beginning. We know that she is married very early on, that she has a husband. Of course, that husband is kidnapped. And we'll get to.
We learn that the women of this world are not going to fall for their bullshit right off the bat. Literally in the opening scene of this movie, when Lloyd pulls up in the limo and tries to make a move on that woman on the side of the road, and the second he reveals himself to be an asshole, she's done. She does not stick around. She walks away. So like there is the sense in this world, if we're going to talk about these two as real people, which I still kind of am and still dealing with, right? Yes. That if Lloyd is the kind of guy to think that way, well, I mean, those kinds of people do exist in the world. But what differentiates this movie and makes it harmless and inoffensive to me, whereas like something in Ace Ventura, when it becomes kind of this weird offensive like character point for him that he's able to pull this off, is that Lloyd fails. He tries to behave that way, and the world doesn't let him.
Yes, and all power to the Farrellys for that. It doesn't change the fact that it's something that exists in the film and just worth visiting. But again, that's why I say that's the most 1994 point of this movie. Mm-hmm. Because that's sort of the only thing. But they're using it more to teach or to riff on than these other movies where, oh, if I show my value, then I will be rewarded. Even The Mask does that.
Right, right. Exactly. Yeah, in a weird way, it's kind of a really mature move for the Farrelly
Yeah.
brothers, which you don't get to say for the rest of their career, right? I mean, even to the point where like people like talk about, we should mention we're talking about this shortly after one of them has won an Oscar for directing Green Book, right? And even Green Book is still something that gets taken to task for not having a very deep understanding of the issue that it's approaching, right? It catches a lot of flack for kind of like painting over a lot of the larger issues of race for a movie that is all about it, right? And so to be able to look at a plot point or a character point in their very first film and talk about how there's actually some weird depth to it is, again, refreshing. Cool.
Yes, and that's why I bring it up. But no, so continue. So yeah, they decide to leave to bring this briefcase that was left at. Is it TF Green? That's just a question I need to ask you.
I mean, it's supposed to be, right? It's supposed to be TF Green. That being said, I think it looked more like the Salt Lake City airport to me. But
and they filmed in Utah, so that's why I asked you, because you are like uniquely.
There's the moment when Lloyd is then running through the airport. There's a couple of hallways that I have been in, and I can say that about the Rhode Island stuff too. But I was definitely like, oh, that's definitely SLC. That's yeah.
Yeah, and that's why, because I'm fairly certain it was filmed at the Utah airport. But outside of it, it's like just TF Greeny enough. Mm-hmm. That I'm like, I was almost
well, convinced. The magic of movies. I think some of the exteriors were probably TF Green, because like they show like the walkway and the one road up to the thing, which is not the case in a lot of major airports and things like that. So like there is also that weird nostalgia factor for me on all levels, because no matter where they filmed, I'm recognizing things. Right. Yeah.
So they decide to leave. The issue though, and I dig that this is not part of the reason why they leave. Like, is that briefcase was left behind for a reason. Mm-hmm. And that briefcase was left behind in order to pay off the ransom for Mary's kidnapped husband. And that's when we're introduced to my favorite star, Mike Starr, as Mental, and Karen Duffy as Shay, the first of two characters named Shay that she would play in 1994.
I think the only part of this movie that I was actually like cringing at was Karen Duffy. What was going on with some of the moments in this movie with her? It was like they forgot to tell her she was being filmed at certain points. What am I just reading something really weird? Like there's a couple of moments where she delivers lines as if she was rehearsing them, and somebody was like, "Good, got it," and she was like, "No, wait, that wasn't my actual reading."
Yeah, she The one that sticks out in my mind to that is when she's like, let me do them. Let me do both of them.
There's a moment when she's talking to the bigger bad later,
Charles Rockets, Nicholas Andre.
Yeah, when she's talking to him in a hotel room in Aspen, where she has a line, and the pause between them, I would call a Pinter pause if I thought for 1 second anybody on this fucking movie ever looked into Pinter. But yeah, man, I don't know. There's a couple of moments with Karen Duffy where that was the only time where I was just like, oh, is this movie maybe not aged so well? But she's only in the movie for all of like 15 minutes, really, of screen time in an hour and 45-minute film.
Yeah, she's sort of like, why is she there?
Yes.
Like, I don't like that's the bigger question.
Is maybe it felt like her lines were just kind of unnecessary a lot of the time, because like, what is her character doing in this film?
She's literally there so that when Mental dies, because he eventually dies, and what I think is one of my favorite scenes in this movie, but mostly because as a kid I didn't understand it. And then as an adult, I'm like, oh, okay, now I get it. And not this last time. Like, I'd seen it before, being 9 years old and watching Dumb and Dumber for the first time and being like, so the ulcer killed him? Like, eating the atomic peppers made the ulcer kill him? But no, the pills that they give him are the rat poison.
Well, so the ulcer kind of starts the process. Yeah. So they end up being followed by Mental, who has an ulcer, a terrible ulcer.
He has also a Chekhov's ulcer, the worst type of ulcer.
Yeah. Yeah. so they begin getting chased by this guy, but luckily through their own stupidity, they run into him on their road trip, and in a act of God or Lloyd, they
Well, it's an so what it is. If we've been comparing this a lot to Greek theater, right?
I mean,
Because
or if you want to go with the Shakespeare, they're the Rosencrantz and Guildenstern of this story. It's just we're seeing it all from Rosencrantz and Guildenstern's side instead
right,
of,
which
instead
that
of
I'd like to
Hamlet's.
see Hamlet from Rosencrantz and Guildenstern's, perspective, but they're dead. So how would you do that? I mean, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead. How would you do a performance that's from their perspective? I'm sorry. It's all stuff that I thought of, though. Don't think that it's not improv. I wish it were. But that's one of those moments where, like, I love that Mental gets his comeuppance in that moment. That his whole plan is to, like, kill them with rat poison, and then that rat poison, it's so poetic. It's such, like, classic drama.
I know.
And I love it. And it's in Dumb and Fucking Dumber.
So he befriends them for a hot second in order to get close to them and kill them, but in true, poetic justice, they turn around and kill him with the tool that that he had brought to kill them. It is a beautifully built arc for that villain as well. And it's why, again, this movie just keeps working for me, right? So they kill the guy sent to kill them. They still have the money. They don't realize, that's the other key part of this so far, is that it takes them an hour and 10 minutes to figure out that there's money in the briefcase. So they're going through, pinching every penny, although Lloyd is being terrible at it, right? Like we see in every scene, every time they stop, Lloyd is coming out with a handful of shit, right? And they get all the way to Aspen, and that's when they discover that they've been carrying around, what is it, like $10,000 or something like that? It's supposed to be
It has to be at least $300,000 because the car that they buy is $245,000.
Right. Okay. And then on top of that, they get a amazing hotel room.
They get the presidential suite.
Yeah.
Usually reserved for visiting dignitaries.
They get 2 tuxedos, but one could argue that those tuxedos are probably not the most expensive ones in that store.
Or they are, because they're like one of a kind things, right? Like you buy a basic black tuxedo. I picked one of those up for $110. Yeah. You buy a full bespoke bright orange with matching shirt, top hat, and cane tuxedo. Oh, and shoes. Let's not forget the fact that, like, he's orange top to bottom. Mm-hmm. That's probably expensive because that's like one of a kind.
Yeah.
Like maybe you're saving 10% because it's been sitting on the rack for a while, but
right. Yeah. So they get to Colorado and they discover that there's a exorbitant amount of money in the briefcase, and they go through the process of spending all of it instantly.
That's as good as cash. Those are IOUs.
Oh man. So they spend all of the money in the briefcase, and then they still track down Mary, the woman that left the briefcase behind, in an effort to try and return it to her, now empty, but they're not thinking about that part. And so they find her, and they end up at this gala event again, just another like excuse for just a funny scene for them in funny tuxedos. I still the killing of the snow owl still gets me.
Well, of course it's incredible. It's incredible on like 5 different levels. First of all, those animatronic snow owls, why? Why would you spend the money to get 2 animatronic snow owls when honestly it could just be an owl in the cage?
This has to be the one. Well, so this means nothing. Your question is a valid question, but the point is that they end up at this gala event to save the snow owls, and the point is that they have just gotten a hold of 2 of the last 8. Right? They represent 2 of the last 14.
70% of the remaining Icelandic snow owl population in the world.
And so the idea is that they're going to be bred, right? And this whole idea. And then not 30 minutes into the party, it's Harry that does it.
It's Lloyd.
Right? It is Lloyd? Okay. Yeah, of course it's Lloyd.
Because he's like, we're going to have some bubbly, and he
pops a champagne cork, instantly killing one of the owls.
And this is the scene that you're talking about with Charles Rocket and Karen Duffy talking. He's like, we killed one of their birds, they killed one of our birds.
Yeah, like everybody attributes so much malice and intelligence to them throughout this whole film, and it is so. It's this beautiful bit of comedy where everybody just thinks that they're being terrible. I mean, we see it with Mental earlier, where he thinks that they're experts, and that's why they go through what everything with him. We see everything in this moment here, but also everything that we know about from the angle of the police. That's the other thing throughout all of this is they are being chased by the FBI. They're not they're they're not going unnoticed for all of their antics, which I think is another thing that I really kind of appreciate and it's what made me really think about the fact that these are the most grounded characters, the most grounded character we've watched Jim Carrey play out of these three, is that he doesn't get away with what he's doing in this movie in a way that he does in the other two films, right? So we also learn they're being pursued by the police the entire time in this beautiful moment where they talk about how they're driving around in the least conspicuous vehicle ever, a giant vehicle made up to look like a dog. So everybody's like, well, we're going to find them instantly, right? And not 10 minutes later, we learn that Lloyd, through dumb luck, has traded in the car. So they're no longer in that vehicle, right? It's the structure of that, like, that realization and then, like, loss is so good.
Except that he buys a Taco 22 for an 84 van, and I don't know how you get from, like, the middle of Nebraska to Aspen, Colorado on a moped like that. The fact that they don't die is one of the only moments where I kind of believe that they're not people, they're cartoon characters.
Yeah.
But you're not wrong. That it's everything happens to them is dumb luck. And there's also the fact that, like, to talk about the Dumb and Dumber title again, I think that could also be it, is that as dumb as these two guys are, constantly we're shown that the world is dumber. And I don't know, like,
well, it's not that the world is, right? Like, the world is trying to be as intelligent as it can be. We see that in the cops. We see that in the way that, like, Mary handles Lloyd and all this stuff. Like, the world is not dumb. It's fate. No matter how hard the world tries to outsmart these two, fate just keeps stepping in. And it's why I go back to the idea of them being like these Greek characteristics of the incarnation of dumb, as opposed to, like, real humans. Right? Is the idea that fate intervenes on their behalf so often, and to the point where you just kind of have to, like, shake your head. And as somebody outside of the movie watching this, constantly feeling like the stupidest people in this world just seem to have things just work out for them, right? Like, it plays off of that idea, that sensibility, that no matter how smart I get, the idiots out there will always be one step ahead of me because of just dumb luck. And that is this movie, right? This movie is just dumb luck on the page.
Yes. And okay, so now we're at the part of the movie where I don't want to say it loses
shit gets
me.
real.
No, shit does not get real. Shit gets, if anything,
crazier.
more fucking absurd after they find Mary, because in true Greek, like, storytelling ways, rather than approach her himself, Lloyd sends Harry to lay down the groundwork for me. And I don't, this is the part that I don't get.
What's the word I'm looking for, though? It's a classic trope where somebody gets sent in to tell her about the friend, and instead she falls for him. Only she doesn't, which I think is also, again, another key thing that I really enjoy about this, is it's able to use this trope without using some of the, like, shittier trappings of it. She doesn't fall for Harry. It's just that Harry happens to be there at the right moment, right? And so he gets invited along to be part of her life in a way that Lloyd has been looking for. And it's only because of poor timing, because he just happens to be the one in the right place at the right time, right? And so Harry ends up being closer to her than Lloyd. But again, it's key to me that it's not because she's falling for Harry in any way.
And I think that's the disconnect. I understand that she's not falling for Harry. I get that, because she is still married, and there's the whole I'm holding out hope that my husband will be okay. And honestly, he was kidnapped by Charles Rocket. He's probably fine, right? Let's just, like, talk about that for a second. But it's this thing where they're telling her that she needs to, like, maintain appearances, And this is the first time that we see that, right? Like Terry Garr is, you should still be skiing, you should still be socializing.
I mean, we
Even
see that concept laid out pretty bare early. Like, let's not act like this movie's subtle about
no,
anything.
no, no.
They lay it out pretty early that her family and her manager, assistant, what is he supposed to be in her life?
I
I never
feel
quite got a
like
handle on that.
he is
Money manager.
I think he's a handler for the family. I think
Yeah.
he's like a Ray Donovan that the
Okay.
Swansons employ.
Yeah, yeah, because they're just that rich, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the idea. So anyway, so we see early on that her husband's been kidnapped and she's very upset about this, but the family's like, you've got to get over it, which is a which is a great like tropey move. Like nobody in their right mind would act this way.
Right, exactly.
But
Your
they're
husband is kidnapped. You don't go on with your life as it was before.
So it's reintroduced in this moment with Harry, where Harry is talking to her at the party and trying to get her to talk to Lloyd, but they are rudely interrupted by her drunk mother, who's like,
Stepmother,
"Oh,"
which is important
right.
because it allowed me to swallow this pill that, for all intents and purposes, is a suppository. Because the stepmother not having like those motherly feelings towards Mary the same way that her like biological mother might in this situation, like it's pretty obvious that Terry Garr's character married into this family for the money. It might not
Right.
necessarily be about love.
Well, and also it's pretty obvious that nobody else really cares that she did. Like everybody's probably pretty aware that she did, and everybody's cool with it.
Right. But I think that it plays to the fact where she's like, you should try to move on. You should try to do that because I don't think love is a concept that exists in her world.
Yeah,
Which,
yeah,
like,
for sure.
again, much deeper than you would expect Dumb and Dumber to present. But for all intents, that's how the character is written in every scene that she is in.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And that's what I mean is they established that fact really early on. Like
Right.
this isn't something that just pops up in the movie now when it's convenient. It is actually something that is laid out early on. Is this idea that the whole family, and the reason why like the police were not involved earlier on and all this stuff is because the family very much feels like love is not a concept to them. It is all about this idea of this money.
Yes. So her being like, you should go out with Harry. He seems like a fun, eccentric character. And I understand Mary maybe the next day going skiing with him. I understand that. It's the plans to meet later for dinner that, like, from a script standpoint, it is almost exclusively so that Jeff Daniels can take X-Lax and shit his pants. He doesn't shit his pants. He shits in a toilet. But in one of the greatest sequences ever put to film. I will argue that. I wonder, though, if it's why Jeff Daniels has been nominated a bunch of times for awards but never won. Like, at the end of the day, they're like, I mean...
He was real good, but he did shit in that toilet real hard.
Like,
he did do a terrible thing to that toilet.
Like, it's kind of hard to forget it. Like, we'll give him the nominee, and he should just be happy about that. But it's just one of those moments where I get it from a script standpoint because you want to, like, keep people together, but I don't understand the, like, keeping up appearances thing where, like, I'll also have dinner with this guy. Because for all intents, we're supposed to believe that Mary is still attracted to her husband and still pining for her husband. That, like, she's bucking the trend of her family and love does matter to her. And it just, it doesn't sit right with me. Because it feels like she made the plan, too.
Yeah, I mean, like, there's definitely some of that aspect to it, but I mean, there's a lot going on here that like first of all, like, again, I don't think the movie ever asks us to get as in depth as we're getting with this stuff.
Right,
it's just that what's going on is that when you do get this in depth with this movie, most of the time it actually works out in a way you don't expect, which is what I think makes the movie work so well. This one time that it doesn't, like, I'm first of all really willing to forgive it. Like, I'm very open to forgiving that this maybe doesn't jive with the rest of her character. The other part of me, though, is also like, also maybe she's breaking down. Her family is around her constantly telling her to fucking get over it. And now she's just gone out and had this kind of actually very goofy but fun day. Clearly she had fun while she was out with this guy, willing to say, okay, I'm going to go to dinner with you in a few hours. it's not weird to me that she would say that, at least in the moment, and who knows what that dinner would have been like if they actually got together, like maybe she would have realized that she was making a mistake. Maybe she would have realized maybe she did need to get over it. I don't know. I don't know what her character would have developed from there. But the idea that her character is willing to take that chance, it never even occurred to me that that was a weird thing.
All right, cool. That's it. I just wanted to make sure because it's just one of those things where I'm like, yeah, we skied and had a fun day, but now like I'll see you again in 2 hours. Like, and I understand that some people do that, but it feels more romantic to me than the day that preceded it lends me to believe she would be feeling. Okay,
for sure. It definitely, we like, I can definitely see that. What we get though is the benefit of the movie never having to go there. You know what I mean? What ends up happening is it doesn't happen, right? He shows up at her house. Lloyd has once again schemed to put Harry in a literally shit position, right? And so has fed him tons of X-Lax. And I think the funnier moment about the X-Lax for me is the drinking of the tea, when he's just like, ooh, like he's just super into it. Oh man. And so he drinks more than he probably should, than any human probably should, because he pours so much of that in there.
Like it's like a little drop, but I'm like, that's enough. But then let's just dump the whole bottle in, to the point where it's like, that's more Turbolax than tea at this point.
Exactly. The joke still holds up, man. So he ends up shitting on the toilet. Their date doesn't work out, but funny enough, it's not because of the shitting on the toilet.
It's because of Lloyd showing up.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I guess his plan is, if I incapacitate Harry, then the way is clear for me. Right. So, yeah, and then they go back to the friggin' Stanley Hotel, right?
They go back to the hotel room, and again, not because she's into Lloyd, but because Lloyd has promised her that he has basically the ability for her to get her husband back. So she goes with Lloyd in an effort to save her husband. So at no point is she ever going along with these two in any real way that is anything more than just like casual interest to like necessity for her husband's life, right? Like, I think Mary stands as a pretty strong character in that she establishes boundaries with these two pretty early on, and she pretty much sticks to them. Even in moments when it starts to get a little shaky, she never really passes that boundary, right?
That's true. I mean, there is something about Mary.
So she goes back to the hotel room with Lloyd, and then end climax of the movie, right?
And then Charles Rocket shows up.
Charles Rocket shows up, reveals that while he's been their assistant the whole time, he's also the one that organized this whole kidnapping. Demands to know where the money is. Lloyd hands him a briefcase full of IOUs. In again, another beautiful moment, and then we have Harry show back up, and he's about to confess to Lloyd everything. Like, he's about to open up about everything that's been going on, and so that they can lay bare, because again, their friendship, as much as that is kind of the arc of this film, never really goes into the territory of them hating each other, and they all end up kidnapped, tied to the bed together, and we have the final scene of this movie in which Harry gets shot.
Yeah, Harry gets shot, but what if they shot him in the head?
That was a risk they were willing to take. Oh man, yeah. So it turns out that Harry, in his adventures back to the hotel, has run into this character that we've seen from time to time on the road with them. As is what happens again, a beautiful turning of the trope on its head. This character that we've run into, this beautiful woman that Harry has kind of had this weird, like, not on again off again relationship, but on again off again like screen time with throughout this whole movie. He sees her once again in the hotel lobby, and it turns out she's been an FBI agent the whole time, right? So this woman that we've kind of been like eyeballing and seeing as, I think of the girl in the Corvette in the National Lampoon movies, right? It turns out that she's actually more instrumental to the story than we realized, right? And she convinces Harry to put on a bulletproof vest and go upstairs and wear a wire and get this guy on tape confessing to the kidnapping, and it all works out. It all works out for these two, because that's how this world works for these idiots.
Why would they give him a gun? Like, I get the bulletproof vest, but I mean, it's one of the funniest moments when he pulls out the gun and just misses
6 times.
It might be, if I had to like shortlist most realistic moments in cinema, Harry shooting that gun 6 times and hitting nothing is so good, because we watch movies, right? As Americans, we watch films, and guns feature all the time, and everybody is an amazing shot.
Even if it's the first time somebody's picked up a weapon, they hurt somebody, right? Like
Right.
that's what happens when somebody usually picks up a gun in a movie.
So the fact
No
that
matter the
like,
experience.
and it's not like he's far away from him.
No, not at all.
It's pretty much point blank range, but I dig that. I really dig that moment. This movie is way more intelligent. I'm so glad we got to talk about it because like I wasn't down on it, but I wasn't feeling as good as I felt after the other two movies. Like as weird as Ace Ventura is and definitely problematic in the end, at the end of it, I was just like, oh man, like this is a big part of who I was.
Yeah, well, we cannot go without talking about the last 2 minutes of this film, because I think that one of the things that this movie does really well is that if you take any moment out of it, and we've clearly proven that as we've dissected almost every fucking joke in this movie, if you take any moment out of it, it distills down what this movie is. No matter whether or not you want to talk about whether or not characters are consistent or not in their actions or their motivations and all this nonsense, you can still take any second out of this movie, any scene out of this movie, and it distills everything you need to know about this film into one moment, right? And that is true down to the last 2 minutes of this film. After everything is said and done, this kidnapping plot is over. Mary is back with her husband, as she should be. There's never any question about that, right? Like, the two of them are now off on their own. No money, no way to get to a home that they don't even really have anymore. And they're trying to decide what to do. And the Hawaiian Tropics bus shows up. And bikini models march out, ask basically point blank, like, hey, do you guys need a ride? And they're too stupid to pick up on that, right? And then the bikini models ride off into the sunset, and the two of them happily walk off in the other direction, playing fucking punch buggy with nothing. And to the point where you get to see Harry pull the stupid move first and say, oh, you guys are in luck, like you girls need to go 3 miles that way to town to find two idiots that really could help you out, right? And then as they drive off, you then get to see Lloyd turn around and pull the even stupider stunt of stopping the bus once again and saying, no, it was the other direction, right? Like it is so good. It is such a good like distillation of their characters and of everything else that has happened in this movie.
And yet, in my notes, I wrote, I hate the bikini tour gag. And I think I hate it because you're not wrong. It is a perfect distillation of their characters. It is great that it sort of disproves any questions of toxic masculinity that I may have brought up while watching the film. And the fact that they're not slobbering all over themselves to jump at that opportunity. Right. And I actually really respect the filmmakers and the actors for saying like it was written that they got on that tour bus, and I respect the hell out of them for being like, no, that's not what this movie should be, right? They shouldn't get a reward at the end of it,
and the reward should not be a female body, right? Like
right. It should not be that. Like their friendship is their reward. Friendship is magic, but still it twists the knife for these two guys in a way that really feels mean to me. Like the rest of the movie, like things work out for them. And as much as I don't want them to be rewarded with like a feminine body, I think that that's gross. And I love that the movie doesn't do that. They're in the middle of the fucking desert.
Mm-hmm.
And like, this is an opportunity for them to like, maybe just get home, but to just leave them alone in the desert. Like, we know it works out for them because the sequel came out in 2014.
Mm-hmm.
But it hits me wrong. And I feel...
I think the reason why it maybe doesn't for me is that at the end of the day, I don't think about them as
people.
As humans.
Exactly,
like,
right.
They're not humans that need food and shelter. Like you know, and I think about earlier in the movie when they get to Aspen and they are basically in the same boat. The difference is they're just in extreme cold as opposed to extreme heat. And like... it works out for them there eventually. I think enough has happened in this movie to prove to me that they're going to be okay, that I don't even think about the fact that they didn't get on that bus. I think that they're idiots for not getting on the bus and asking for a ride, for sure. But like at the same time, I'm not worried that they're now going to die in the desert.
So I think that's why it doesn't work for me. You've actually really helped me out with this. Is fate will provide, right? We've been taught that about these characters for the whole film, that fate will provide. They get to Aspen, basically penniless, freezing to death. And that's when they find out that they're sitting on a gold mine, right? That they've been traveling with this briefcase full of cash the whole time. Fate provides for them. Fate provides for them in bringing that bikini tour bus to them. Like, that's fate saying, hey, come on, let's do this for a little bit, right? Like, this is how we're going to get you out of this fucking desert. And it's sort of the first time that these two characters deny fate's gift. And I feel, and that hurts me. That hurts me that, like, fate provided for them yet again, but this time they don't take it. So, like, what does that mean for them? Does fate provide again? Do they get a secondary gift from fate? Like, if fate is so invested in these, you know, for lack of a better term, dumb deities of dumb, like, surviving so that the world has something to measure itself by, what happens?
I don't disagree. My answer to that is there is a sequel. Let's go find out. But like the idea that fate will always provide, no matter how many. Like, fate is not a thing that you can like reject. You can't piss off fate. Fate is fate, right? Like, I think that's a key thing to remember about the concept of fate, is that like there will be other opportunities because there is always other opportunities as time marches on, right? And so like, if you want to get this deep and think about like what happens when they reject this one thing, yeah, they rejected this one thing, and I think that it is a little weird considering what happens in the rest of the movie, but I do think that it is something that makes total sense in the moment for their characters to do, you know?
Yes, and
I'm not worried that they won't be provided again.
And they survive. We know that they survive because there's Dumb and Dumber 2 TO. So, but it's just like, I think we've just figured out why it doesn't sit well with me, and it's because fate's provided for them this whole movie, and we've seen nothing but that. But this is the first time that they deny the gift of fate. And why?
But they choose for the first time each other over fate.
Oof, damn. That's we brought a lot to this movie that I don't know if this movie was prepared for.
Well, but you know what I mean?
Love it. Yeah, I do. I do know what you mean.
Like
yeah.
There's so much in this movie where if you want to go deeper, you can, but you also don't have to, which I think is one of the things that makes it still like worth watching and makes it still the cult hit that it is and all that. And on top of all of that, you talk about one of the first things we talked about was Jeff Daniels being in this movie and how weird that is and how people kind of view that, right? And the thing is like, if you really think about Jim Carrey, who he is now, and thinking about this year in movies, like, why did he do these movies? Well, obviously as like a springboard to a very lucrative career, but now it puts him in this weird position where you can't see number 23 and not think about the fact that this is the dude from fucking Dumb and Dumber, right? Like, you can't go to Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind and not think about like how that movie is ghosting all of this shit that like Jim Carrey did back in the day with Ace Ventura and The Mask and all this stuff, right? And so I think what we're doing is we're showing that like he is capable of doing this kind of comedy that we are talking about in Ace Ventura and The Mask, while also still having the depth that he brings to some of his later dramatic work, right? And the thing with Jeff Daniels that makes it so weird with him being in this movie is this is the only time we really see him do this kind of humor. Other than that, like, we know him as like the guy in the newsroom. We know him as the squid and the whale, like doing these heavy dramatic roles later on in his career, you know? And so it feels very out of place for him to be here. But I think in retrospect with Carrey, it also feels kind of weird for him to be here now. I think part of the reason 1994 sticks out to you and me as much as it does, like a sore thumb in Jim Carrey's career, is as much as it is the thing that kickstarted it for him, it's not the kind of actor he is now.
Right. I mean, like, so I was very curious what comes next after Dumb and Dumber. Do you know before I reveal it?
No, go ahead, reveal.
It is Batman Forever.
Okay.
So you look at, I mean, Batman Forever is a whole other Megillah, and here's a promise from the State Report: we'll look into it at some point, right? 1995's Batman Forever. Well, there'll be a time where we give it a kiss from the rose on the grave. I'm making that promise here because I can do it. We're going to take a break from Jim Carrey, but I want to look into that movie because it's interesting. But if you look at 1994 as an audition from Jim Carrey to get into Batman Forever, it makes perfect sense because Batman Forever is mainstream. It is big franchise. It is, in a lot of ways, what legitimizes him as an actor.
Yeah.
Which is why it's surprising that after Batman Forever, he goes back to Ace Ventura and does When Nature Calls.
Yeah.
Like,
well, and that's just I mean, When Nature Calls feels like it will forever feel like one of the biggest money grabs by everybody on set. You know, it really does feel that way. But we can always talk about that later. I think one of the things that's really interesting about Carrey, just to wrap up this like 3 series thing, is that what I think we've seen throughout these 3 films and what ends up happening later in his career is he allows himself more and more and more to be reined in by a director rather than owning the film that he is in. He very, very slowly becomes he goes from being this great character actor, and what you do with character actors is you let them build a character and bring it to the table. Look at somebody like a Johnny Depp, who has made a career out of building a character, bringing it to the table, and then you work with him as a director to build the movie around them. Carrey was that in something like Ace Ventura, but I think over time has very much moved away from that, and I think we're just watching him slowly move away from that. Dumb and Dumber is a perfect example of when he allows that funny man character to be guided by a more deft hand behind the camera in the Farrelly Brothers. Peter Farrelly specifically, right?
Mm-hmm.
Isn't it? Yeah.
And it's really crazy everything you just said, where I feel it talks about how he took this role because he was excited to work with a first-time director again because of the freedom he felt that it got in Ace Ventura, working with a first-time director on that film.
Yeah.
And then he comes to this, and really, I mean, based on the other 2 movies we looked at, this is the most directed that he has to be, right?
For sure.
The only moment of improv in this whole film, and there could be more, but the one that everyone talks about is his reaction to Man Lands on the Moon, right? That was not written in the script.
Yeah.
And also the most annoying sound in the world. Those are the 2 things, right?
Yeah.
Where like you point at and it's like, that's Jim Carrey improvising. And one of them is like that. We landed on the moon. We did it. Like that's so funny. And it's so it's funny because like, why the fuck is that hanging in this bar in 1994? why are like, that's the last great accomplishment of man is we landed on the moon 30 years ago.
But you're not wrong, right? Like, this is the most, I think that's the best way of putting it. This is the most directed that we've seen him out of the 3 movies. It is the most time that we see somebody put some reins on him. And I think that you mentioned that for Batman Forever is the next movie in this. And I think if you go to watch that, you'd see even more, that there's more of a direction in his character that you just don't get from something like an Ace Ventura.
Right. And then when you think of the thing after Ace Ventura, When Nature Calls, which I think we can all agree right now, definite cash grab.
Yeah, I don't. It doesn't bring anything to the character. I can't even talk about it right now because it would become a whole other episode.
Right, exactly.
But yeah.
There are some sequels that we're going to look into. And while I don't think we'll give them each their own full episode, I wouldn't mind a time capsule episode examining the sequels to the Jim Carrey 94 movies.
Yeah.
Because a lot of them are lacking, just for lack of a better word. As I just said lack too many times. But it's just one of those things, because then he does The Cable Guy, which is The Cable Guy, right? And it's The Cable Guy.
Man, do we just have to start a Jim Carrey podcast?
I feel like maybe
let's talk about The Cable Guy for another episode too.
There's something there. And then you get to Liar Liar. And Liar Liar, for me anyway, in my personal life, is the next Jim Carrey movie.
It's the start of the second era of Carrey, for sure. He's older, he's wiser, and he's a better actor by the time he gets to that movie. So going back to doing the physical shtick that he's known for from Ace Ventura, but as like a much more mature artist.
But as Stanley Ipkiss. Stanley Ipkiss man, not Stanley Ipkiss vessel for the mask, doing the physical comedy of Ace Ventura, and Lloyd Christmas is kind of left in the dirt Am I wrong? Can you think of another character besides Lloyd Christmas that he plays that sort of exemplifies that character
Well,
again?
I said it at the beginning, and we didn't talk too much about it. And I'm surprised because of how much I thought it this entire time. But the thing about Lloyd that I think gets left behind is that Lloyd is probably his meanest character.
Oh, I don't. And I was actually going to reference that in regards to Harry is sort of there and supportive of his friend.
Hmm.
In Dumb and Dumber 2, the sequel, right? And I don't want to dwell on it too much. It opens with the fact that Lloyd has been in a mental institution for 20 years, and Harry has been by his side, like, doting on him that whole 20 years. And then it's revealed that it was just a goof. That, like, Lloyd was playing a joke on him.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's like
Lloyd is
he's mean. He's a
mean
fucking
character.
he's a
Yeah,
jerk.
he's a mean character.
He's a
Right.
jerk of a character. And it's strange, but I can't think of another role that he plays that's like that. I mean,
Right.
kind of the Cable Guy, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, like without
That's
going
maybe
there.
the closest, but there's not the stupidity or the physical shtick that goes on with that. It's just outright. I mean, Cable Guy is a horror movie. Like, can we like that's the thing that we need to talk about when we watch that, if and when we ever talk about that movie. Cable Guy is a straight out and out like horror film that just happens to like have a weird like comedic edge to it. So it's a dark comedy.
It's a Ben
yeah,
Stiller comedy, is what
yeah.
I will say, because that's what it is. That's how I look at that movie. Is that like this is Ben Stiller making a comedy, because that's what he does. He always has like a darkness bubbling under the surface. Ben Stiller.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I can't think of another mean
character, yeah.
Jim Carrey character where like that's his central
Dr.
thing.
Robotnik.
Well,
Like, that maybe is the closest that we get to him ever
yeah,
being me again. Yeah.
yeah. It's strange to me, but yeah, I don't know. I dig this movie in a way. I think it's still worth watching. I think if you move to Rhode Island, a copy of this should be included in the welcome
Yeah,
basket.
you go to Alaska and you get money for all the oil fields. You move to Rhode Island, you get a copy of Dumb and Dumber and Outside Providence, which nobody really wants. But
Read the book Outside Providence. The book is better than the movie. I'll be that guy. Because whatever. Also, Dumb and Dumber, read the novel from Parachute Press. Because, sure. What do you think the novelization of Dumb and Dumber is like?
yeah, I like, how do you distill into a book the physical like comedy of both of them? I mean, like, oh man, that's the other thing is watch this movie. Watch this movie for Jim Carrey and then realize halfway through you're actually watching for Jeff Daniels.
Right. Which is why it was such an interesting thing to be like, I'm divorcing myself from Jeff Daniels, watching just for Jim Carrey, and that's why he comes across as meaner. It's why he comes across as the lead, where I've always viewed this as a two-hander. But he really is, he's the one behind all of the motivation in this film. And it's weird to watch Harry as a puppet. And I guess at that point, Dumb and Dumber, he's dumb because he's dumber because he allows Lloyd to lead him down these paths.
Right.
A person who doesn't understand the word "the" should not be the person that you hitch your wagon to. Though not to discourage any horses, 'cause I don't think horses understand our language.
We don't know.
We don't know because they never talk to us in plain words, in plain English. So, just fun things from '94. Last episode, we said that we would discuss this. Dumb and Dumber is the longest Jim Carrey movie at an hour and 47 minutes. The Mask is second longest at an hour and 41 minutes. And surprising me at the time, but now I get it, Ace Ventura is an hour and 26 minutes long.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes all the sense in the world to me that it is the shortest one. Because more time with Ace Ventura in that movie, I think it tips the scale too far.
Yeah, Dumb and Dumber has an unrated version that has 6 extra minutes. I have no idea what's in it, and I don't really care to. I don't feel like I need 6 extra minutes of whatever nonsense they cut. Usually, especially back in '94, usually when things were getting cut, it was for good reason. Does Ace Ventura or Mask have unrated versions?
So,
no, right? Because
Ace Ventura has a VHS edition that includes 2 scenes. The original VHS of Ace Ventura included scenes that were cut for time from the theater. but they're incorporated into the VHS and actually onto the TV edit of the film in order to avoid more graphic moments in the film.
Okay. All right.
I mean, that's just something that I know.
But it's not like it doesn't turn it into an unrated version, right? Like it's not something they cut because it was too raunchy for
right. It's actually,
people,
it's more tame.
Yeah.
It's just another case with Ace.
Yeah.
I hate that I did that I rhymed accidentally like that. And the mask, as far as I know, has always been presented the way that it is presented.
Yeah.
Dumb and Dumber, I know for a fact what one of the minutes is.
Yeah.
Of those 6 additional minutes. A more graphic killing of the parrot.
Oh, God.
Like, I wish...
No, I didn't need that.
Like, I was... Because I looked into it. I was surprised to find out that there was an unrated version of Dumb and Dumber. Mm-hmm. And the only one that I could, like, specify is that is more graphic, the murdering of Petey. And I'm like, oh, cool. That's not necessary at all.
Yeah, clearly cut for reasons. Yeah, again, 1994, they weren't doing that thing where they cut stuff out just for the DVD, which is something that does happen with comedies later on. Sex Drive being one of the worst, one of the worst versions of that. Man, yeah, I don't know. I'm glad that this is the one that we could end on. I think if we had gone in any other direction, if either of the other two had been last, I don't know what we would be talking about right now.
Right. Something else about Dumb. Oh, I'd also like to look at the other 2 people in this film who worked in 1994, which is Jeff Daniels playing the role of Harry in Speed, and Karen Duffy playing the role of Shay in Blank Check, which is just strange.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
And then to go even a step further with the strange, Tone Loc showing up in Blank Check as well with Karen Duffy.
It's like there was such a small pool of people they were willing to put in films back then.
Yeah. I was a little like, did Tone Loc do 3 movies in 1994?
Well,
Didn't.
Blank Check is Disney, right? But is New Line involved in any way? Because I'm wondering if it's also just a matter of like of the studio system, right, at the time, trying to put these people, plug them in where they could.
I don't believe so. I believe it's Touchstone. And Touchstone. I know that Touchstone, because it's not specifically a Walt Disney movie when Blank Check comes out.
It's one of the ones that gets usurped later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, like, obviously Touchstone is one of their houses, or it might have actually been Buena Vista Pictures. That was that. Remember they did that for like 2 years?
Yeah.
We're like, this is a Buena Vista picture. And I'm like, we all know that's Walt Disney. No. It's just like, we don't want to, I don't know. Because like Walt Disney kind of made themselves in the live action comedy. Like, you look at Kurt Russell and all of the movies he did.
Oh yeah, for sure, man. I mean, before that, Don Knotts and all of the Herbie movies and all of that.
Yeah, like it was a big part of them. And then in the 90s, when like animation had its golden era, and they're like, we don't want to associate anything else with Walt Disney's name right now.
Right. We don't want to confuse people, right?
Like, which is like, that's wrong. Like that's the wrong way to market something. If the Walt Disney name has a lot of zhuzh right now, they add to that. You build on that. You don't separate from it. Or is that wrong, right? Like,
I don't know, because now everybody complains about how Disney owns everything. But the thing is that people don't realize they've always owned everything. Like,
yeah, it's not new.
Yeah.
It's just easier to look at because Disney is not separating it. Oh, right. That's an interesting thing. But yeah, so that's just, it's weird to think of all the cross-pollination of this. And you're not wrong. This is another New Line movie. Which, good for New Line, right? Morgan Creek becomes the outlier with Ace Ventura. And I don't know, I had like money numbers, but I don't really care. They all did very good. It's the first time that a single actor was in like a #1 movie, 3 #1 movies in a year. Like,
I mean, I can tell you this, the big thing about Dumb and Dumber is that while at the time it was a pretty lukewarm reception from people critically, it does end up being the biggest movie of the holiday season. Like, it comes out for the Christmas season of that year, and it owns that season.
Yes, I know that I remember that. I remember how is this movie still making money?
Right.
And it's like, because people saw it multiple times.
Because lo and behold, sometimes people just want to go to a movie and have some friggin' fun and not, and you know, like.
And yet we come here and we analyze the shit out of a film like Dumb and Dumber. Anything else that you'd like to add regarding Jim Carrey 1994 or really just anything in general?
No, I mean, it's, we started this whole thing off because we thought it was so weird that these movies hit like they did and when they did and all of this. And I think the, the only thing that we've really hit that's really that weird is that, more people didn't really follow suit. Like I started this thing thinking we were going to find the impetus for things like a Adam Sandler career or even like an Eddie Murphy career later on, but like really what we saw was like the model set up for what leading men could get away with. And the one thing that we learned about Jim Carrey is that the way that you succeed in that is that you temper it, like come out big and then step back and let other people kind of shape it with you. And you end up with the best movie of those three being the one in which he has got the shortest leash on him. So I don't know, man. I don't know why somebody like Sandler didn't learn that until too late in his career with something like a Punch Drunk Love, or it's if Click had come out like 5 years earlier for Adam Sandler, I think we'd be looking at a much different career for Adam Sandler.
Yeah, I think the reason why I wanted to look into this was to see if this was a deal with the devil type situation, like with something like Home Alone being the number one movie.
Right.
And like how did that happen? What happened there? But you think Jim Carrey had the number one film in this country 3 separate times, 3 separate films in 1994. And arguably most people, when you say, Jim Carrey, those are the movies that one of those 3 movies are the ones that's mentioned.
Right.
But the reason for that is because there was broad appeal. Like he did 3 very different movies, all comedies, but all very different types of comedy.
For sure. His audience for each was very different.
And he showed his range, and he showed that he isn't a one-trick pony. He can do anything. And looking at 95, where he does Batman Forever and Ace Ventura When Nature Calls, he continued that until he got to the point in his career that he wanted to be in. And it didn't take that long for him. And that's impressive.
Right, exactly. That's what I mean is I thought we were going to figure out, why all these guys followed suit after Carrey. And again, I guess in the true lesson of Dumb and Dumber, they learned the wrong lessons from his movies. They didn't take the step back and re-examine who they were as a comedian and as actors and as artists like he clearly did,
Yeah. And I have to imagine that some of that comes from the fact that he worked with the Wayans on not in Living Color. What was the name of their show? Is it in Living Color?
Yeah.
Okay.
Living Color.
Yeah, I was trying to think of Living Single is what always jumps into my head whenever I think of it in Living Color. It's because of the word living. I'm a child. I'm a child who cannot discern 2 separate things. But I think that time also
everybody on that show. I mean,
yeah.
Dag was on that show. Like you end up with a lot of really great comedians that come out of that show that prove themselves to be much better artists than just slapstick bullshit artists.
Right. And I mean, but working with the Wayans brothers, I mean, they worked. Like there's a reason why they were known and they had the prestige that they had in the 90s.
Right.
And then you make White Chicks and then, you fall onto Scary Movie, but that's a conversation for another time. The last thing is, and this is small and then we'll get out of here. You guys can have the rest of your day to you. But do you believe, I have a theory and I'd like to see what you think of it, that Charles Rocket is only in Dumb and Dumber because of Earth Girls Are Easy?
I definitely could see that for a role that is pretty minimal, as important as he is to the story. I think again, another side character, and that's what happens in these road trip films is people only show up for a few minutes, right? I think that calling in a favor for that role is definitely something that you would do.
Yeah, and I think that Jim Carrey, I mean, Charles Rocket's a jerk in Earth Girls Are Easy, and I would love if Jim Carrey's like, hey, cast my friend. Oh, but cast my friend. I'm Jim Carrey. I'm getting like 49% of this film's budget is paying me. That's another crazy thing, right? $17 million budget. 7 million of that is Jim Carrey. Nuts. Man. This movie was made for $10 million. I mean, not really, because you got to pay Jim Carrey, but think about that. I don't know. It's a crazy fucking movie. But yeah, so I've always thought that, like, Charles Rocky, you don't see him in a lot of things because, you know, he unfortunately took his life, and, you know, that snuffed out too soon, R.I.P. Charles Rocket. But it's weird to think that, like, he worked with Jim Carrey in 2 movies.
Yeah, yeah. You know, this goes back to the stuff we were talking about with like Che and Tone Loc too. Is like there's a pool in which people are working, and yeah, and which is something that we see later on, right? With the likes of like Seth Rogen and James Franco, like you end up with people working together in these pools that they know and are comfortable with, and that's what leads to good comedy. Is everybody on set trusting each other and being willing to let the joke go, and it allows you to try things that maybe don't work and get cut, you know, but you're okay with that because you're around people you trust.
Exactly. And you see a lot of Jim Carrey influencing that in a strange way. When you consider that Judd Apatow is behind something like The Cable Guy, and then, you know, he goes off and he works on Anchorman, which then goes to 40-Year-Old Virgin, which is where Seth Rogen sort of builds that pool. Comedy is a very inbred system.
Yeah, and again, I think it has to be because of what people are willing to try and fail at in comedy. There's something about comedy where you have to fail a lot before it works, and I think any comedian worth his salt will admit to that.
Agreed. All right, so that's been our time capsule episode on Dumb and Dumber. If you've listened to this, that means that there's another one coming down the road. If you'd like to get in touch with me and give me like some of your thoughts on Dumb and Dumber or other stuff that you might like to see time capsuled, you can find me on Twitter at Devon D. Decker.
Yeah, and if you want to hit me up with anything that we can do that is so far removed from Carrey, like as much as I've enjoyed this time, I am very interested to swing in the other direction. Find me at Siege versus the World.
I agree with Sejohn, because this was a lot of Jim Carrey, and as much as I'd love to talk about the other stuff, I want more. I want more to talk about that's not related to him. But that's a story for another time. Thanks for listening, and Will, please take us home.
Thank you for listening to the Say Report with your host Devon Decker and Sejohn Serwick. Please follow the guys on Twitter and Facebook by searching for The Say Report, and you can always subscribe on your podcast channel so this is delivered straight to you and you can enjoy it every week. With apologies to your mother, we'll see you next time.